Did you know that today is World Glaucoma Day? Glaucoma is a progressive vision condition that could lead to permanent blindness. So please, don't forget to schedule your eye exam. It's very important. Also, Monday gone, we celebrated International Women's Day. So Emily takes today, this time, to celebrate all our ladies who inspire, uplift, take care of, and empower others. And of course, to the gentlemen here for the support you give to our amazing ladies. My name is Dawn Lane, and I'm the program manager for the Massy Learning Institute. Today's session, entitled Is Uncertainty a Threat or an Opportunity?, will be presented by our very own Anjen McLean, a catalyst for change and a phenomenal woman. Anjen is the group risk manager for the Massy Group. She has over 20 years expertise in risk management in various industries and countries. Anjen has a passion for helping organizations improve through disciplined approaches that combine data with good leadership. Anjen is passionate about presenting risk management concepts in practical ways to all levels of the organization so that the organizations can bring about positive change towards operational excellence. Some of you might recall that Anjen was here in January. Anjen presented on how understanding our vulnerabilities as individuals and organizations can actually lead to resilience when dealing with change. Today, Anjen will speak about change, but in the form of uncertainty, and why we should see uncertainty as something positive that can be taken advantage of to achieve our objectives. So now, it is my pleasure to hand you over to Anjen McLean. Anjen?
Hi, good morning. Good morning, Dawn, and good morning, everyone. So you invited me back. Thank you. I take that as a good sign. And as Dawn says, we are going to talk about uncertainty. At the last workshop, I talked about vulnerabilities and resilience. So that was looking inwards. And today we're going to lift our eyes and actually look around us at what is happening. So what do we mean by embracing uncertainty? And for many of us, our worlds might probably look a little bit like this. There's just so much going on now in our personal lives for each one of us, where we can see that there are things that we just can't keep our hands on because we're not quite sure what will happen. And uniquely for all of us, we are all going through the same level and the same kind of uncertainty or source of uncertainty. And of course, that is COVID-19. I was thinking at the beginning of the year that January 2021 feels a little bit like January 2020. It's like a 2-year lifetime packed into one extended year. So we're all dealing with a same source of uncertainty, which is, what is going to happen in the next 3 months, in the next 6 months, and there's always something we grab a hold of. Yes, there's a vaccine, and then there are problems. We will vaccinate everybody, and then there is a new variant. So even with dealing with COVID-19, there is a lot of uncertainty. And for many of us, that has brought anxiety because the way it translates into each and every one of our lives is slightly different. Certainly, it has brought distress for some, but for some, it has actually brought a lot of positives. And probably for most of us, it's been a mixed bag that we sometimes have to just take a deep breath and wonder, what will this week bring for us? So I'm going to talk about, because this is really the heart of my job, uncertainty. when it relates to objectives is what risk management is. So I like to take practical approaches from my field and try to bring them to you in a way that it can impact both your business as well as your personal life. So remember 12 months ago, and that would have been maybe February, March, when the specter of COVID-19 was now appearing over the Latin America, Caribbean region, the territories we operate in. And I remember at the time, I would typify the response of many of our leaders and even our citizens like the three monkeys. I don't want to hear about COVID. COVID, that is for China. That is for the United States. And even those countries, they saw it as, well, that's the Chinese one, to quote the former Prime Minister, Mr. Trump, President Trump. But it wasn't. It's not a Chinese disease. It became Italian, Spanish, German, French, and slowly a pandemic. And we had to come to terms with that. But for most of us right here, as it approached the Caribbean and Latin American shores, this was our response. It's not coming to us. And we sort of closed our eyes, like a train wreck coming. And we said, don't even mention the word. Some of our CEOs at the time, January, February, as we started to raise awareness that this is something that Massy is going to have to deal with, they said, Anjen, yes, it will come, but what can I do? Or one CEO I remember said, well, what do you mean by lockdown specifically? But all of them actually found their way. And in the end, our group responded to that uncertainty in a way where our financial results, our ability to protect staff, and even our way of working has changed. We responded. And now we have a new phase of the uncertainty, which is vaccination. And once again, I hear responses like, oh, that vaccine, they're going to inject a chip into you and they're going to track you. And many of us, including myself, said, well, I'll just wait until the developed world gets vaccinated and then some of us are like, I don't want to hear about vaccine. It's not going to happen. I'm not vaccinating. So there's uncertainty again, and it comes in a new form. What is vaccination going to bring? And then what I call the post-COVID normal, what is that going to bring? So we are at a point again where we're facing a common uncertainty, and we have an opportunity to respond, both in our personal spaces, where we have members of our family who are vulnerable, and then from a business perspective, it's all change again. Are we going to keep work from home? Are we going to have a response to our frontline staff? What are we going to do? How do we now prepare for this phase of uncertainty? So the way I think about it in risk management, I've lived through many crises, 2008 financial crisis, the energy crisis, now COVID-19, and I tend to see things as there's always going to be some twist, some turn that is going to keep me in a job, hopefully, right? But what I see is there's always a certain uncertainty in life. And some would say, well, the only thing certain is death and taxes. Or in the Caribbean, we say, well, the only thing that stays true is you have to stay black and die, or stay brown and die, or stay white and die, but you get the drift. This might even change in the future, who knows? But the only thing that is certain is uncertainty. So when we think about that, what can we really control? And the only thing we can control is our response to uncertainty. And that's where today I'm going to go through with you 5 really simple concepts around managing our response to uncertainty, especially where we know in a year's time, there will be something else, either for us in our personal space, as a business, or as a nation. So one of the things I'd like to talk to you about is changing the mindset around uncertainty. If we know it's the only thing that's permanent, because we say change is the only constant and the origin of change is uncertainty, why is it that we see uncertainty as a threat, as something to be afraid of that brings us so much stress and anxiety? You know, we see something approaching on the horizon. It's not there yet. It hasn't hit us yet, but we imagine all different ways that it can have a negative impact. But the truth is, all uncertainty brings either upside or downside. So think of that a bit. Our brain sees uncertainty as a negative source, a source of negativity. But the reality, when we look at all the data, when we look at human history, is that uncertainty brings both upside and downside. So the way I think of it, coming from a mathematical space, is uncertainty brings infinite possibilities of what the future can be. And when I think of that, I get a lot of hope that, okay, this is something for me to assess and think, it's not necessarily going to be all positive. It could actually be very beneficial. There can be some good and there can be some bad. So that's the first thing that I'd like to advise you on, how to approach uncertainty. And that gives you a very open-minded approach and a thoughtful approach as you see uncertainty start to become a reality. After that, changing the mindset and changing the culture. And this is also something to talk about and get your employees and staff really on board. Uncertainty is not necessarily a bad thing. What does the uncertainty mean as it relates to our objectives? So if you've attended any of my workshops, you know, I always start, what are we trying to achieve and why? For businesses, what is our strategic objective? And what is that competitive advantage that makes us achieve that objective better than our competitors? And then what is the impact of that, of the uncertainty on those objectives? And that's really important because there are many uncertainties, but the only one that we really should focus in on is the uncertainties that matter to our objectives. So then a whole lot of uncertainties just fall away. So 1 year ago, there were discussions on vaccination. And, you know, if you had asked me about it, people asked, well, are you going to get vaccinated? It didn't matter because the only thing that was important then was wearing a mask. Vaccines weren't going to come to the Caribbean and into my space right now. So it was an uncertainty, but it didn't matter then. It matters now because we are on the cusp of vaccination. It matters to our business because many of our staff are frontline staff. It matters to our policies because we made changes to adapt to COVID. And now there's a new reality that vaccination will bring. We will be able to travel, but it's not quite clear how. We will be able to open up restaurants and bars, but it's not quite clear exactly how that will take place, who will be allowed, will there be, so there's still uncertainty, but there's more information now that we can now assess how will this affect my objectives. And as parents, of course, the uncertainty is, what is school going to look like? You know, do I need to go back to getting up at 4:30 in the morning to get lunch kits ready? Or is there going to be some new hybrid that, again, I need to adjust to? So focus on the uncertainties that matter most to the objectives. And that gives you less to worry about and more to focus on. And then the second thing is probability or likelihood. What is this chance that the impact of the uncertainty will affect my objectives? And that's also important. So when we think of vaccination, I know many people have concerns. So probability, what's the probability of your getting COVID if you are not vaccinated? We in Trinidad have been very fortunate in terms of having, you know, a low amount of of deaths, hospitalizations, but it has come at a cost. And for many Caribbean countries that could not afford to shut their borders, it has also come with a cost. So if we have to decide, from the perspective of what is the uncertainty that vaccination brings, you should also think about what is the likelihood of, having a negative impact on our objectives if I get vaccinated or not. Very recently, I'm going to be using the example of a very powerful woman. It's World Appreciation of Women this week. And, one of the women I'd like to spotlight is Mia Motley, who has led her country and arguably our region through this pandemic in terms of strategies that I think we can learn from. So in Barbados, this dilemma, as they actually now at the forefront of vaccination, has been real. The debate around should nurses and policemen get vaccinated, and it started with a lot of arguments until there was a death of a child and a death of a nurse. And then the likelihood of a negative impact from not vaccinating became very real to the public. And that should be a lesson to all of us as we enter this phase, new phase of the pandemic. Vaccination, yes, there is uncertainty. As you start to think of these, think also around likelihood. The next is really important, and this is where I get really excited because this is where creativity is unleashed. And here is a quick tip when you have to think about uncertainty. Ask yourself these two questions. What are 2 to 5 best things that can happen if we exploit this uncertainty? That's the upside. What are 2 to 5 of the worst things that can happen if we don't manage this uncertainty? So it's not if this uncertainty happens, but rather if we don't manage this uncertainty. So this is where our response to uncertainty empowers. There are things that I can do now before the uncertainty becomes a problem, because a problem is certainty that matters. It's already here. So what we want to do is to look at the uncertainty before it reaches our shores, before it becomes a problem, and create a new possibility. And that possibility, understanding that there can be upside, downside, as well as both, we have an opportunity to put things in place that will exploit opportunities that are there. What opportunities will a post-COVID normal bring? And we should be thinking as businesses about this because we will have to change again as things open up. This is something that I think we're probably a little bit behind in starting to prepare for that, but it will come. Another one, the longer we take to vaccinate, the longer it will take to get back up to normal, or we would live with a hybrid model that is going to bring even more disruption. So that's the downside that could happen if we don't manage this uncertainty well. Vaccination will help Caribbean economies to get back up and running faster, and there are some new innovations that, again, Barbados is doing. So vaccine tourism. They're taking advantage of having passports. So I think in April, you can actually travel to Barbados and get vaccinated. Well, why is that? Well, because they've actually vaccinated about 50,000 people in 3 weeks. This way of looking upside and downside rests on vulnerability. Caribbean economies like Barbados, Jamaica, St. Lucia understood their vulnerability, which is to dependence on tourism. And so they couldn't afford to lock down. And they put in solutions that reflected that vulnerability. In strategy and in opportunities, Barbados is also understanding their vulnerability, and they are choosing to adapt to this new uncertainty in a way that still supports them. And this is a lesson for us in personally, as well as a business. What are 2 to 5 best opportunities that we can exploit, and what do we need to do to manage now, understanding our vulnerabilities that will help us weather any negative impact. The step 4 is to make informed decisions. And by that, I mean that although we live with uncertainty, there is also a filter of data coming through, always. No matter the outcome, either way, we grow through the process of embracing uncertainty, but we do that by taking the nuggets of information that trickles through and acting. So acting can be either taking an action or monitoring until there is more information. There's a lot of uncertainty around the new vaccine. Oh, it's so new. They just invented it. The reality is that this new vaccine is based on trials of vaccine from Ebola as well as cancer research developed many years ago. So the Canadian Institute of Research developed the Ebola vaccine in 2001, many years before it was actually used in 2015. That research let scientists become aware of the need to have better technologies and better processes for dealing with vaccines because they knew that another one, a pandemic, will be on the horizon. The team that came up first with the new vaccine did so as a result of their research in cancer research. So there is a perception that it is new and so it is risky, but actually through information that probably needs to be made more available, they have been able to take actions very early on that led to what we see as a success. So making informed decisions really is critical, but do nothing is a certain way to let uncertainties just happen to you without actually having an opportunity to exploit or manage the downside. So what's the best way to get that information? And you would say, well, you know, there's a limit to how much I would know. Exactly. There is a limit to how much each of us knows. And so one example that I like to use is the Situation Room. The Situation Room was created by John F. Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs disaster when Russia, America almost went to war, and he realized that the flow of information to him was actually in silos. And because of that, he was not able to make effective decisions to keep his nation safe. So I like the image of the Situation Room. You should probably recognize some of the people in the room here from the Obama administration. So the way the Situation Room works is all the heads of department, the senior people across the organization come together, they bring their information, they share it so that they can come up with a holistic approach to making a decision. So a burden shared is a burden halved. So that gives you better assessment of information, you get more, you understand how one set of information can impact the other, and you get better solutions. And it's one of the, you know, if I've done any workshops with any of your companies, you would know that I go on and on about getting more employees engaged in solutioning. As we approach the new post-COVID normal, I do encourage you to talk to your staff about what does that look like and what are some of the changes that they would like to happen. So we take a proactive approach. And what are some of the things that they can see if they don't manage the situation well or take a proactive approach to managing what could be potential downside. So create a Situation Room, create it at different levels of your organization, create it at different levels in your home, create it at different levels in your personal space. When we see uncertainty, we sort of tend to shrink, but really opening up and sharing this is important. Just one important point that I love about this picture, the commander-in-chief, he almost gets lost. Where is he? He's in the background, he's listening, and he's letting others there actually go to the foreground so that they can have the space to contribute. So what am I saying? I'm saying when we're faced with uncertainty and looking at what we are all going to go through now in terms of the vaccination schedule, But really and truly, that's going to impact each and one of us differently. And we have all different uncertainties outside of COVID that we have to deal with and will continue to deal with. How do we do this in a way where we get perhaps more positive than negative, but certainly we don't feel sort of swept away by events? Focus on uncertainty that matters most to our objectives, and really get context by thinking about, well, what's the likelihood that this can have an impact on me? Then asking yourself the question, what is the best that can happen? And what is the worst if it's not managed properly? And what are the vulnerabilities that I had before? And what are the vulnerabilities that I will have after the actions? Make an informed decision. Do nothing is not that. So monitoring until you get more information, or as you get information, make sure to make an informed decision. One thing I didn't mention is that fear of failure. You probably will. Statistically, there will be failures. There were failures. So Germany was at the head in their response, and then they failed. And so too did Australia, and then they failed, and then they had to pivot and change again. It's just a normal part. And the more we get comfortable with the fact that failure will happen, the more likely that we will also be comfortable with looking at new possibilities and new creativity again and again. You don't know everything, but many of the people around you know most things. And so they're better able to share information to make informed decisions, and you're going to end up with better solutions as well. So in closing, uncertainty is where things can happen, and that's exciting. It's where the opportunities for success, for happiness, for really living are waiting once we change our mindset.
Anjen, thank you. Once again, the topic was fantastic, and it brings a lot of questions. So at this time, I'm going to hand you over to Renee Barnett, who will be moderating our question and answer segment. Renee?
Hey, thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Anjen, so much. So our first question this morning: how do you as a professional and a leader deal with uncertainty? And how do you help your team who may not be in the same open-minded space to embrace uncertainty?
That's a great question. So I face it with my team as well. I'll share an experience. This was probably 2019. There were changes at the head office, and that brought a lot of uncertainty for many of the leaders at the head office and for our teams. So I understood that my role as a leader was to actually think of solutions, but also to be very empathetic and put myself in the shoes of my team members. So the first thing I did with that was to be very honest and open around the possibilities of what can happen, obviously in a responsible way. Having a deep understanding of each person and their vulnerabilities and the strengths helped me to assess, what are some of the solutions I need to have in place for each of them, as well as for the department. That led to looking at our programs, our purpose. So it was a lot of soul searching, to going back to what are we trying to achieve? What are our objectives? What do we do really well? And then I could get a sense of the likelihood of that uncertainty affecting my team. Once I understood that, I can then pivot and then say, okay, this is what we're going to focus on most. The uncertainty is around this question of value creation. What value do you bring? So I had to go through and really look at the programs that Group Risk offered, and then focus on those programs that aligned to a new shift, the new direction of the company. And I had these, to be quite honest, similar conversations with Audra. And so the birth of MLI was also a response to uncertainty. So it is, and it sounds, well, it can sound academic in terms of putting through those 5 steps, But when you actually do apply it regularly, it just becomes part of how you approach uncertainty.
Thank you so much, Anjen. So our next question is, uncertainty usually brings with it overthinking. How can one reduce overthinking to boost creativity and forward action?
I like that question. What I call overthink, I call navel gazing. And I think we're definitely at risk of that, you know. So navel gazing is sort of like, oh my God, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? It's really, I think once you start exploring possibilities, that's when excitement comes in. And then empowering people to go explore, then also gets things done. We navel gaze, or we get thought in a sort of mind capture when we're afraid of failure. And so it's to release that fear of failure so that we can act and accept that, yeah, I'll probably mess something up. But here's what can happen if I do. What's the worst that can happen if I do mess up? And then how do I sort of mitigate that downside? So that allows action to take place. There's a lot of debate around some of the other territories about how this vaccination takes place, and even in Europe. And I feel that frustration, you know, at the end of the day, do something. AstraZeneca versus, you know, Johnson's and Johnson's. The countries that acted, like, we just want 4 of them, bring 4. Maybe one will fail, maybe something will go wrong, but building in contingency and building in resilience really helps to get actions taking place.
The next question, similar to the one asked before, can you recommend any strategies for reducing the anxiety that will come with this uncertainty?
Acceptance. So acceptance that uncertainty is permanent, and acceptance that uncertainty is not only negative. Uncertainty represents infinite possibilities. And it's hard to attach a negative emotion to infinite possibilities because, okay, so how do I choose? And this is where the control comes back. How do I choose more positive than negative? And that prompts action and reduces stress.
Great, thank you. So when people do not have access to answers and information, they create inaccurate messages, which can cause complication and again create anxiety when they're in times of uncertainty. Can you explain again what can be done in these situations?
Yeah. So I have a recent example from a team member. I'm not going to name her name. And we both have vulnerable relatives. And, you know, as again, I'm using the example of vaccination because it's real to us, but it can be applied to other situations. You know, we were talking about, are we going to get our relatives vaccinated? And she said, oh no, this is so unknown. I don't think I'm going to let her get vaccinated. And I said, well, what's the likelihood of her actually having a very negative outcome if she gets COVID? Because obviously the longer we wait, you know, the impact of COVID is going to come home. And then what's the negative impact from a vaccine? And looking at the data, there is a, you know, 1 in the million of having a really negative sort of like death from the vaccine versus, you know, the impact from COVID. We are all living with it. We've all seen in each of our areas. And that helps to give context. And that context then helps to move out and shift into action. So going back, I would say context, and then what is that uncertainty that affects? We are very selfish people. So when we start to hone in on how this can impact objectives, likelihood, then it releases us to act.
Wonderful, thank you. We have a question dropping in from an anonymous person. Failure is real and fear of it is real. Given the fact that what is facing our businesses is to find the best response to use the limited resources, How do we then create the space to evolve the thoughts from navel gazing to innovating?
I like that question. We never know if it was the best response or the perfect response. And I don't think that is what we should be trying to achieve, because we never have perfect information. We have some information and we have some sort of trade-off in decision making around what's the best that can happen if I act this way, and what's the worst if I don't manage it. Building resiliency in the organization around failure is important, because when, not if, when setbacks come, the resiliency to shift and act again brings a new range of possibilities. So every time we act, we open ourselves to a new range of possibilities, positive and negative. And that happens with failure as well. And when we fail, we have an opportunity to create and choose a new reality. And if we create that awareness in our organizations, it liberates people to take risks in a responsible way.
Thank you. We have another question here. Can you please walk us through again just the 5-step process?
I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to show it.
Wonderful, thank you.
I'm going to use an example, a personal example. My husband is a math teacher. And long story short, but he worked in Barbados, so he actually used to commute, and he taught at a private school in Barbados. So he taught online, and then twice a month he would have to travel to Barbados to a private school where he taught there. So as COVID approached, he became very concerned about what this is going to mean for his job security. Closing the borders meant that he couldn't travel, and many of the expat parents and families actually left Barbados very quickly as they realized borders were closing. So we actually went through this process, which uncertainty matters most to him. Understanding his vulnerability, which is his dependence on income in another country, this was going to have a real impact to him, his ability to contribute. So closing the borders was really going to impact him in a negative manner. The likelihood, it was coming. So we actually had to think very quickly about what could happen. So it was very easy to see what is the worst that can happen, which is he's going to be out of a job. And that's actually what happened. What is the best that can happen? And I said, but this is the best thing that could happen to you. You're always complaining about having to fly to Barbados. You teach math. Everybody needs math lessons. The best thing that can happen to him is that he no longer has to travel, and he can create self-employed other options, or even maybe join a local school here. So we had a range of possibilities that we needed to think about. Maybe he can have a one-on-one student, and so we looked at, can we use a room in our house that he can give lessons? So we came up with what is the best that can happen. We already knew what is the worst that can happen, but from the worst that can happen, we needed to now manage the downside. We had to make changes in terms of savings. We went through a budget, the cost of the ticket versus what, saving on that. So that allowed us to make an informed decision. So very soon before he was let go, he had a list of parents from schools he had taught with. He reached out, because we've traveled a lot in our life. We reached out to friends overseas. And now he actually has his own business where he has students from Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados. So some of the families that also migrated also asked to retain him as a tutor, an online tutor. Because he was doing online tutoring before, this was a no-brainer. He knew how to do this and do it really well. The uncertainty around having regular income now got translated into a viable strategy. The new uncertainty and the new vulnerability, yes, that is shifted. So now the stability of income is a new vulnerability, because most of you who know, when you pay your lessons teachers, some of you pay on time, and then most of you, I'm sure, pay on time, and then some of you don't. So that's a new vulnerability. And then he started to make sure that he spoke to a lot of people. He got feedback. So he's always getting feedback on what's going on, what are some new technologies, new platforms in education. So it's changed his teaching style. It has certainly changed our family finances. And then there's going to be new uncertainty again when school reopens, when and how that reopens. That's going to bring new uncertainties. So even in a personal space, we were able to go through these 5 steps. Which uncertainty matters most? Will it impact me, and how? What's the best that can happen? What's the worst? Make an informed decision. And yes, if you fail, there are other people who can inform you on how to do this better, and you can pick yourself up and you can go again.
We have another question here. Most persons are presently in the mindset of increasing daily COVID figures, and that creates fear and closes off the future. How would we strategically help our teams right now to look at the future and the opportunities presented?
Well, remember I talked about there are many, many uncertainties, but focus on the one that affects you, that affects your objectives. Might be controversial, but I only look at that data when it starts to impact what I need to achieve or what I need to know. If I'm going to Tobago, as I am going to be going in a few days, then I'll probably look at the data in terms of COVID in Tobago. Other than that, because of how I live my life, which is work from home in a very closed circuit, that uncertainty is not going to impact my objectives. If I needed to be out and about in the community, then that information would affect me. So my advice is focus on the information that has a closer link to the uncertainty that matters most to the objectives. Otherwise, it's really not helpful.
Great, I like that answer, thank you. Another question here from an anonymous person. What advice do you have for someone who has chronic uncertainty and focusing on their past failures?
I would say in the past failures, there's some nugget of learning and what is there for me to know about myself, about my reality in those past failures. And that changes failure into something that teaches. Because otherwise, we go through the same. If you see that if you get nothing out of that except it's the same failure and it's the same problem, well, that's the learning. There is a cycle that I need to break out of. And then when you do that, you're actually doing something about it. You're shifting it from a position that's passive into something where, I have the ability to shake this off. There is a book actually. It's called Mindset by Carol Dweck. I can't show you, but it's very, very, very transformational how we can learn to fulfill our potential. And it really goes through and talks about why understanding failure and why having a growth mindset to failure really is critical from parenting, business. So that's a book I would recommend. I've shared it with my team. We make mistakes. And when we do make mistakes, it's always an opportunity to say, not just why do we make the mistake, but most importantly, what can we learn and how can we do it differently going forward? That shakes that sort of feeling of failure off of you. And it's really, really important.
Wonderful, thank you. Moving on to our next question. As a leader in uncertain times when people fear job loss and hear the whisperings? How can you shape the narrative to quell the fear while being authentic?
So it's something I've had to deal with. It's something that my team has had to deal with. And that goes back to that vulnerability, that talk on vulnerability. Each and every one of us has the potential to create something that brings value to someone else. My cousin has just found herself in that situation. We could see it coming, and she likes to make soaps, and so she started doing this. And I said to her, you know, Lisa, and that's not her real name, but we'll call it that. This is probably going to be the best thing that happens to you. And there is now a period of uncertainty and difficulty, but she has the support of her family to try to make it better. If you see that this is a possibility, an uncertainty that could happen, start now digging in to what are the things that I can do, what are the assets that I have, do a vulnerability assessment. So if you have access to that workshop before, perfect time to do a vulnerability assessment. And generally there is something that you find. And then from that, what are the best things that can happen if I lose my job right now? And what actions can I take now to help me mitigate the negative impact? Because truth be told, I don't know anybody in this group who hasn't had to come to terms with that. I think, and it doesn't matter how senior or junior we are, the nature of change now in the Caribbean, in the world, with disruptive technologies, automation, it means that it's something that many of us have had to deal with, and we've seen it in the group. So it is a real uncertainty. And so if you know that, start thinking, what are the courses that I can take? What are the projects I need to lean into a little bit more, you know, and putting your hand up to say, this is something that I'm interested in. So rather than sitting back and thinking, oh, this is going to happen, there is an opportunity to actually lean in and then say, okay, if this is going to happen, what are the things that if I were to look back, I would say, I wish I had done that, and take those actions now. This is the time where you have the opportunity to change the outcome. You know, there are infinite possibilities now. Which one would I like to choose now?
Excellent, thank you so much. Okay, we have another question here from an anonymous person. What advice do you have for an employee who is experiencing targeted emotional abuse from their supervisor and the uncertainty that is posed by that supervisor's approach in this COVID season of heightened uncertainty?
Well, I think this is one that again, the reason my cousin sort of had to leave was actually she was going through a similar situation. Our values as a group is in conflict with that supervisor's actions. And first of all, there are avenues to take to address that. So that's the first thing. Stepping back from that, you really need to focus on what's important to me. What are my values? I can't tell you, I know what I would do, but it really doesn't matter. You need to know of yourself, what is my long-term goal, or what is my medium-term goal? How is this impacting me as a mother, a wife, or a father, if it is a male employee? And then really having some sort of, you know, personal reckoning around how is this impacting me as a human being and my ability to play the role I want to play. I think once you get with that, a lot of things shift, and then it's the courage to act.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Our next question, do you believe that a situation room would challenge an organization to think strategically and apply agile ways of working in order to link with the right people and info at the right time?
I've seen it happen in many of the companies. I've seen it recently in a business continuity workshop. The magic that's created from getting different people in the room to see things, see the same thing in a different perspective always amazes each and every person there. You know, I knew that, but I didn't see it this way. And I've seen it, I've witnessed it, you know, that it organically, naturally comes up with solutions that are either tactical or strategic. And when it happens, the CEOs that are involved are always amazed that that knowledge, that creativity existed in their organization, and they always welcome it. It's a simple thing, but I'm always amazed. You know, it's one of the things I love most about my job. I get to see magic happen.
Great, thank you. Moving on to our next one, with the uncertainty regarding COVID vaccine side effects, how can we process the information coming from the various institutions that are responsible for sharing accurate information? How can you know what is accurate from what is fallacy?
So there are valid sources, certainly WHO, and there is a lot of data now. I don't think from a change management perspective that many of these institutions and governments have actually done a good job in sharing that information. But stepping back from that, you can look on the news and you can, you know, again, likelihood, how many news items have you had from reputable sources where the negative impact from the vaccine has resulted in death? You know, I struggle to think of any. Maybe there is one, but I remember that there have been allergic reactions. But I absolutely could probably quote the impact of not being vaccinated and getting COVID. And so will there be negative impacts? Yes, I'm sure there will be. Every vaccine that has been produced creates some sort of downside, headaches, nausea. We can reach out to our colleagues in Barbados. 50,000 Bajans have been vaccinated so far. In 3 weeks, another 50,000 is going to be vaccinated soon. Almost all of Israel has been vaccinated, the UK. So we now have a growing body of data around the negative impact of vaccination. We also have a lot of information around the impact of not being vaccinated. You can weigh up and make an informed decision. In 5 years' time, would someone grow a 6th toe because of the COVID vaccine? Maybe, but I need to make decisions now that's going to impact my ability to go see my sister in the UK, my ability to, you know, have hope for a lot of people who are out of work. And this is the information I can make a decision on now.
Thank you for that. We have someone here who's asking if you can repeat the name of the book and the author.
Yes, sure. It's Carol Dweck is the author, and Mindset is the name of the book. It's one I would recommend highly. And for those of you like me who take an active role in their children's education, one of those parents, there's also a book on mindset for teaching math by Joe Bola. So I'll send the information to Dawn and she can distribute it. That's Boaler. Very powerful as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. So just one last question then before I hand you back over to Dawn. So people normally come to a place of acceptance once given time to get to that space and mindset. What place does a properly rolled out early communication plan play in helping our teams in these times of uncertainty?
I can answer that so easily. So at the beginning of, so as I mentioned, you know, 3 monkeys, hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. That was our initial response back in February. And obviously in my role as group risk manager, you know, I share solutions that help. And I shared sort of templates around communication plans, risk assessments, and I did an initial assessment of what are the companies in the group that are more likely to be impacted by COVID. And certainly retail was one of them, financial services. And so I reached out to those teams, shared the communication plan, because it is an important component that we play from an organizational perspective in getting our companies ready to deal with uncertainty. So that looked something like different stakeholders. So the CEO would have a role in communicating information that staff needed to be here, which is, we're going to take care of you as our staff members. And I would probably advocate that is a role that needs to be repeated even now as we approach vaccination. HR would play a role in terms of probably communicating how that looks from a vaccination perspective, and then what are the protocols that, again, we're going to shift. Did work from home. Some people are going to come back, and so HR needs to take a lead in communicating that. And then managers and supervisors also need to be aware of their role in what they communicate to staff. Some companies like Massy Limited have taken, a stance on work from home. If you can continue doing your job post vaccination, you can continue doing your job work from home. And that's a policy stance, right? And then for my team, we're probably going to continue that now. When things change, maybe, we will have to pivot again, but at least there has been some communication on that. So I would strongly advise that that should probably be happening now, because within the next couple of months, we're going to be living the reality of vaccinations. Okay, so I'm going to put on my change management hat here. You need to start communicating very early to get people comfortable with the change. And part of that is also giving them the opportunity to give you feedback. And like hardhead children, you need to say it several times. In change management, scientifically, and this is scientifically true, you need to say it 5 to 8 times for people to hear. So if we're going to send an email out today for an action on Thursday, that's not going to work. We should actually be now preparing our staff, just sensitizing them that vaccination is coming. Even if we don't have all the details, which we probably don't, that's okay. Vaccination is coming. As we get more information, we'll reach out to you. And as we get more and more information, we communicate, but most importantly, we create avenues for feedback, because our staff will tell us about realities that will inform the policies that we will create. And if we don't do that, we will create policies that bring problems. So it's really important to have that feedback loop and to start it early.
So that's excellent, Anjen. I want to take this time to thank Renee for moderating the session, and simply fantastic. Thank you again, Anjen, for the fabulous nuggets in this session. I'm going to look out for the information on the book so that I can share with those here today. And as always, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes. To everyone, we've come to the end of another MLI webinar. Thank you for being with us today. Remember to look out for our flyers announcing other programs, other webinars, and paid programs. See you next time. Remember to level up. Bye-bye.